This episode is sponsored by Honeybadger. Are you looking to enhance clarity in production without a PhD in observability? Try Honeybadger Insights. Honeybadger Insights is built around structured events and Honeybadger's new query language BadgerQL, which allows you to analyze data, create metrics, and design custom dashboards. All of this is available for free with Honeybadger's monitoring suite, which includes error tracking, uptime monitoring, and more. Explore your data in new ways with BadgerQL. It's pretty cool and simple. So give it a try today at honeybadger.io. That's honeybadger.io. Sometimes when you're working with a large form, it can be a bit overwhelming, especially if there's a lot of things that are conditional based on certain responses on that form. For example, there's no need to ask for a driver's license if the person's age is under 16, at least in the United States. Also, if the user doesn't want to provide their social media information, then we shouldn't even show that on there unless if they were to check something like the extend profile. And finally, we have a preferred method of contact, and if we select the email or phone, then there would be no reason that we need to gather their phone number if their preferred contact is the email. And so, with a bit of background magic, I'm going to refresh this page, and now it looks a lot more condensed. So now, we're not even asking for the driver's license unless if the person enters that they are at least 16 or older. Then they can check it off if they are. If they're reporting that they're under that age, then the option won't even show up. We can also extend their profile, and we can put in something for their Twitter or LinkedIn information. And for the preferred method of contact, if we select email, then the email input will show. However, if we select phone number, then the phone number will show up. And so in this episode, we're going to look at creating this functionality without using any third-party gems or any third-party JavaScript libraries. Instead, we're just going to write our own stimulus controller to handle this and all the various situations. So here we have a number comparison where we can set it to greater than, equal to, or less than. We have a boolean checkbox that we can check, and then we have something for the select. So this covers a pretty wide range, and we're going to make it simple enough to where you can modify it based on your specific needs. So to get started, we're going to generate a Rails scaffold, and we're going to call it our users with a name. We'll have an age, which is an integer. We'll also have a driver underscore license, which will make a boolean. We'll have an extend underscore profile, and we'll also make that a boolean. We'll then have something for our Twitter, and then also our LinkedIn. We'll have an enum for our preferred method of contact, and then we'll have our email and phone number. And then we'll run our Rails DB migrate to migrate the database. We'll then go under our user model, and we're going to go ahead and set up our enum. So we'll have an enum, and in the past, I would set up the enum with something like this, where I would then have the email, we'll make it a 0, and then our phone, we'll make it 1. However, in a recent version of Rails, I did get a deprecation notice, so I started writing it like this, where we have an enum, the symbol, and then the second argument is going to be our hash for the email and phone number. And so if we didn't do anything else right now, then we really haven't gotten any of that functionality. It's just going to be one big long form. So what we need to do is to create our stimulus controller that we're going to use to toggle the fields. So I'm going to hide some of the different things that we don't need. And as a bit of a side note, I do have Inline Fold, which is a VS Code extension installed, which basically just hides the list of classes. I really like this because it does make it a lot easier to just focus on what I need to, and if I need to update the classes, then I can easily just click in there to expand it and make my changes. And this is the Inline Fold extension that I'm using, which will basically do that automatically. However, I did notice one problem is that any kind of ERB tags, the class wasn't getting truncated. So I did have to come up with a regex, which I'll paste in here, and then I'll share it in the show notes. But this regex will then allow the class within the ERB tags to be hidden as well. And so the name we're going to leave alone, but the age, as soon as we type in a number here, the driver's license is going to be dependent on that. So I'm going to just create a bit of space here so we can just focus on this. And so we are going to have a stimulus controller that we're going to wrap around just the individual things that we're going to be working on. So I'll indent these, and then we can add the data-controller, and we need to give a name to this stimulus controller, and we'll just call it the toggle-fields. That does mean that we do need to create a stimulus controller with the Rails generate stimulus, and then we can enter the toggle fields, and that'll give us our stimulus controller. And so before we go further, I do want to go in to that stimulus controller, and we're going to basically go ahead and write this out. And one nice thing about the stimulus controller is that the targets that we create, we can have multiple ones called the same thing. So we'll have a hidden target that we will apply to any div that we want to be hidden, and then we need to have our input. In the connect function, we can call this dot input target, and we want to add an event listener. And basically, we want to listen on the change event, and then we can call this dot toggle dot bind, and we'll pass in this. And essentially, what this is doing is it's going to invoke whenever the input changes, it's going to invoke the toggle function. And we're binding this just so we still have the context of the stimulus controller. And it's important whenever we have an event listener that we're adding, when we disconnect from this function, we want to make sure that we're also removing it. Otherwise, you run the risk of having memory leaks. So we'll have a remove event listener for the exact same thing. For the change event, calling this dot toggle, binding the stimulus controller. And so when we first load up the form, if we're working with an existing form, then we want to make sure that any of the input fields are being hidden based on the existing selections or values. So we can actually, on the connect function, we can invoke this dot toggle to do that. So all of our business logic is going to happen within the toggle function. So we basically want to loop through all of the hidden targets. So we can do a this dot hidden targets dot for each, and then we can just iterate over each target. We'll create a function. And for now, just to make sure that this is working, I'm just going to call the target.classList, and I want to add the d-none. Because I am using Bootstrap, I am going to do a d-none, which is a display none. However, if you are using something like Tailwind, then you can use hidden. You also may need to do something similar for the small hidden, also the medium hidden, and also the large hidden. However, because I'm not using Tailwind, I'm just going to comment that out, but I'll leave it in here just in case if you are. And so basically what we're doing at this point, on the connect function, we're going to add the event listener, listening for any changes of our input target, and then we're calling the toggle function, which is going to loop through all of our hidden targets, and we're going to add the class list d-none. So let's come back to our form and look at our age. I'm going to add the data-toggle-fields, and this is going to be our target, and this target is going to be the input. We then want to hide our driver's license on this stimulus controller. So I'm going to add it to the outer div of the form label and the form checkbox. We can add the data-toggle-fields-target, and we can set this equal to hidden. Once we do that, we'll save our form, and let's go ahead and test this out. Coming back to our application, I'm going to just refresh this page, and you can see that the driver's license boolean is hidden. If we type in an age, it doesn't do anything, and that's simply because we don't have any conditionals yet to enable it or to make it show. And doing this is going to be a little bit tricky because on each one of these, we do want it to be dependent on our input target and its value. However, if we did have several different options that we wanted to hide based on this one input, but they were going to respect different values. For example, if it was under 16, maybe you had a checkbox that a parent or guardian is present, but if they're over 16, then you want to check some other information. And so on the same element that we have our hidden target defined, we're going to add another data attribute. However, we're just going to make this outside of the stimulus controller and really just be a dataset attribute. So we'll have a data dash greater than, and we'll set this equal to 16. And so now we can check on this input target when it changes. We can grab this value and compare the two to determine whether or not this needs to show. We could also have a few more situations where maybe we only want to check it if it is less than. So we're going to create a data less than. Maybe we want to check the exact value. So a data value is equal to 16 and so forth. I'm going to remove these two for now because that's not what we're focused on. However, we are going to be using those down below. So back in our stimulus controller, where we are looping through each one of the targets, we need to check for the different attributes. So I'm going to set a constant, and we'll just have a target value, and we'll set this equal to our target, which is the hidden target, the data set dot value. If that's present, then we're just going to set it to the exact same thing. Otherwise, we're going to set it to null, because then we can check if the target value is not null, and if the target value is not equal to our input value, then we know that we should not show that div or the hidden target element. We're going to have something very similar for our greater than value. So we'll have our constant greater than value, and we'll set this to our greater than. Notice on here, I am using camel casing, even though in the form, it was a data dash greater dash than value. But when we're using it within the stimulus controller under the dataset, it is camel case. So if this is defined, because we are going to be doing a comparison, I'm going to do a parse float, and then we'll paste in that value. If it wasn't defined, then we'll just set it to null again. We can do something very similar for a less than value, and we can parse that float as well. So now that we have these, we can set just a temporary variable. So we'll do let should show, and we'll set this equal to true. So by default, we're going to show it unless if something happens where we should not show it. So we can then do a conditional if the target value is not equal to null, and we need to get our input value. So we could do this dot input target dot value is not equal to the target value. Then we can set that should show, and we can set it equal to false. However, this is only going to work when you can call dot value on the input target. If we have a checkbox or something else, then that could be a problem. So instead of calling this dot input target dot value, I just want to call this dot value. That does mean we need to create another function, and it's going to be a getter function. So we'll have a value, which does require a return. But we could do a switch case on here, and we'll do a switch for this dot input target dot value. And on the case of a checkbox, we need to do one thing. So we could do a return this dot input target, but instead of dot value, we could do a checked, and we want to be a bit consistent here. So we can do a checked, and we'll pass a string back of true. Otherwise, we can do a string passing back of false. If the case is a number, then we also want to return this dot input target dot value, except we do want to parse the float. Just because we are doing a check, not only is the value, but also the class of the object. So we're going to parse the float of our input target's value. Otherwise, we'll just set it to null. If you have any other situations that you need to cover that's not a number or checkbox, you can simply just add it in to this switch case. Oh, and one little issue I see here is that this is an actual function that should not be inside of the toggle function. So I just need to move it down to the bottom here. And then we can add our default, meaning that if it doesn't match those cases, then we're just going to return the input target value. And so we have a check already for the target value. So that's checking if it is equal to the exact value. So if this is a data type of string and we have a data type of a number here, then that's not going to return true. So it would basically hide that element. So I want to do something similar for the greater than value. So we'll have our greater than value is not equal to null. And this dot value, we then need to do an operation on the greater than value, and we want to make it less than. So by making it less than, if this value is less than the greater than value, then it should not show. We can do something similar for the less than value, except we'll make it greater than. And so now we could just do a conditional check should show, meaning that none of these conditions applied where it should not show. Then we can basically remove that d-none. So we'll do the class list remove the d-none. Otherwise, with an else, we can then add the d-none. And just for completion, I'll just add this comment to remove those as well. And so that's all we need to do for our stimulus controller. And now we're basically ready to test it out. Oh, and one issue here is that I just copied and pasted the input target value, but we actually want to check the actual type. So we can set that to the this.inputTarget.type, and then it's going to check for the checkbox or the number or default to the input target value. Oh, and I did have a few typos here. Our data set was greater than, and I forgot to copy over that less than. But that should be good now. So we can come back to our form now, and there's nothing that we need to do here. For the age and driver's license, that's already set. Coming back to the web application, we can now refresh the page, and the driver's license disappeared. If I enter in a lower number, it doesn't update. But if I put in 16, it now shows. So we can then check off the driver's license or not, and we can hide that if we want. If you don't like the functionality where the stimulus controller is just listing on a change event, you could change this to also have a key up. So that way, as you're typing, if we put in 18, it then shows automatically. And so depending on your situation, you may want that, or you may want to have both. But now, let's go ahead and work on this extend profile. We have a checkbox. When unchecked, we want to hide Twitter and LinkedIn. And then when we check it, we want to show them. So coming back to our form, this is going to be very similar, where we're going to have another element that we are then wrapping our extend profile, the Twitter and LinkedIn. We'll then indent our code, and we'll start cleaning this up a bit. I'm going to go ahead and hide our first one, just so we can focus on the extend profile. And so the first thing that we want to do is on each one of the elements that we're wanting to hide, we're going to just paste in that data dash toggle dash fields dash target of hidden. And then we can add the data dash value, and we want to set this equal to true. And we could have just added this to this whole bit of code in its own element, but it also works just having them separate like this. And we also need to add our target for the input. But once we do that, we should be good to go. So we can come back to our application. I'll refresh the page, and now it's hidden. We can check the box, the Twitter and LinkedIn show up, uncheck it, and they disappear. And so now we have our preferred method of contact, which is going to be a little bit more complicated. So I'm going to hide the extend profiles, and now we're working with the preferred method of contacts. The first thing that I want to do is to update this text field, because we don't want it to be a text field. Instead, we want this to be a select. With the select, we can get our user.preferred method of contact. This needs to be a class, and we can just get our keys. You can format this however you want, but I'm just going to leave it as it shows. We can then pass in some select options, which I'm going to have the include underscore blank. We'll set that equal to true. We can then add our data dash toggle dash fields, and this is going to be our target, again, for the input. And so the phone, the email, and our select, we do want to make under the data controller of the toggle fields. So I'll just copy that, paste it down here. And so that's looking pretty good. We do need to add our data target fields for the hidden, and I'm just going to copy that down from the one above, and I'm going to add it for both the email and the phone. So now that we have those there, the data value we do need to update. Whenever we select from the preferred method of contact, if we select email, then we want the email form to show up, and for the phone number, we want the phone number to show up. And so that's all we have to do. And I do have a little bug here. I do need to pluralize the preferred method of contacts to get the keys. So I need to plural that as well. But we can come back, refresh our page, and that looks good. So this form is now much more condensed. If we put in our age of 18, or if we lower it, then the driver's license will show based on that. We can extend the profile, or we can hide that, and then we can set our preferred method of contact to phone number, and our phone number field shows up, or we can select the email and the email field shows up. And so overall, I really like doing these kind of things because it's very powerful. And I did actually cover this back in 2015, so 9 years ago almost, to this date, and so much has changed since then. Originally, I was using jQuery and TurboLinks, and there was also a gem, Dependent Fields Rails. I haven't looked at this gem in quite a while, but the last time it was updated was 10 years ago. So I definitely wouldn't be looking at this gem when Stimulus can provide a modern solution. This definitely was a bit more unobtrusive. However, with the familiarity with Stimulus controllers, I do think that this is a very viable solution that we have come up with, and it's also pretty powerful. And all of that in under 50 lines of JavaScript code. Well, that's all for this episode. Thanks for watching. For more videos, check out driftandruby.com.